Today, we delve into the captivating stories of Dutch and French colonization in the Americas. The Age of Discovery, a period marked by extensive exploration and expansion by European powers, set the stage for the colonization of the New World. Among the myriad of nations vying for control and influence, the Dutch and the French played pivotal roles, each leaving a lasting imprint on the fabric of North American history. Our journey today will navigate through the activities of the Dutch East India Company and the establishment of New Amsterdam, which would later become the bustling metropolis of New York City. We will unravel the strategic and economic motivations behind Dutch colonization efforts, shedding light on how trade and commerce drove their expansionist policies. The Dutch East India Company, known for its extensive maritime networks and robust trade infrastructure, exemplifies the Dutch pursuit of economic prosperity. The company's establishment of New Amsterdam in 1626 marked a significant foothold in North America, serving as a critical trading post and a gateway for Dutch commerce. Through these endeavors, the Dutch aimed to secure a dominant position in the lucrative Atlantic trade network. Simultaneously, we will explore the multifaceted motivations driving French exploration and colonization. Unlike their Dutch counterparts, the French were propelled not only by economic interests but also by religious and cultural aspirations. The fur trade emerged as the cornerstone of French colonial economies, fostering a symbiotic relationship with indigenous populations. French traders, known as coureurs de bois, ventured deep into the wilderness, forging alliances and establishing extensive networks with indigenous tribes. This trade in valuable fur pelts not only brought economic prosperity, but also facilitated cultural exchanges between the French and indigenous communities. Moreover, French colonization efforts were significantly influenced by missionary endeavors. French missionaries, primarily Jesuits, sought to spread Catholicism and convert indigenous populations to Christianity. These religious missions led to complex interactions and cultural adaptations as the French navigated the delicate balance between conversion and respect for indigenous traditions. The efforts of these missionaries left a profound impact on the social and cultural landscapes of the regions they touched. To provide a comprehensive view of this period, we will compare and contrast the Dutch, French, and English approaches to colonization, highlighting their distinct goals and interactions with indigenous peoples. The English focused on permanent settlement and the establishment of self-governing communities, while the Dutch and the French often prioritized economic interests. These differences in approach led to varying patterns of interaction with indigenous populations, shaping the course of North American history in unique ways. As we embark on this exploration of Dutch and French colonization, we will uncover the diverse motivations and strategies that drove these European powers, their interactions with indigenous populations, and the lasting legacies they left behind. Through this lens, we gain a deeper understanding of the complexities and nuances that characterized the colonization of the New World, enriching our appreciation of early American history. Background and context. The story of Dutch and French colonization in the Americas is deeply rooted in the broader context of the Age of Discovery, a transformative period in global history that spanned from the early 15th century to the 17th century. This era was characterized by unprecedented exploration, driven by a confluence of economic ambitions, technological advancements, and a burgeoning curiosity about the world beyond Europe. To fully grasp the significance of Dutch and French endeavors in the New World, it is essential to understand the broader historical backdrop that set the stage for their colonial enterprises. The Age of Discovery. The Age of Discovery was initiated by the Portuguese and Spanish, who sought new trade routes to Asia to bypass the overland routes controlled by Muslim powers. This quest for alternative routes led to the remarkable voyages of explorers like Christopher Columbus, who, in 1492, inadvertently stumbled upon the Americas while seeking a westward passage to Asia. The discovery of the New World opened up a plethora of opportunities and challenges, sparking a wave of exploration and colonization by various European powers. The Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494, brokered by the Pope, divided the newly discovered lands between Spain and Portugal, giving Spain the rights to most of the Americas. However, other European nations, notably the Dutch, French, and English, soon contested this arrangement, driven by their own aspirations for wealth, power, and influence. These nations began to explore and establish colonies in different parts of the Americas, leading to a complex web of territorial claims and rivalries. Motivations for colonization. The motivations for colonization were multifaceted and varied among different European powers. Economic interests were paramount, as the New World promised access to valuable resources such as gold, silver, and agricultural products. The burgeoning demand for these commodities in Europe fueled the desire for exploration and conquest. Additionally, the competition for dominance in global trade networks spurred nations to establish colonies that could serve as strategic outposts and trading hubs. Religious motivations also played a significant role. The Protestant Reformation and the Catholic Counter-Reformation heightened religious tensions in Europe, leading to a missionary zeal among both Protestant and Catholic nations. Colonization provided a means to spread Christianity and convert indigenous populations, often justified as a moral imperative to civilize and save native peoples. Technological advancements in navigation, shipbuilding, and cartography facilitated long-distance voyages and the establishment of overseas colonies. The development of the caravel, a small, highly maneuverable ship, and the astrolabe, an instrument used to determine latitude, revolutionized maritime exploration. These innovations enabled European explorers to venture further and with greater precision, ultimately leading to the establishment of permanent settlements in the New World. The Dutch and French in the Age of Discovery. The Dutch and French entered the Age of Discovery somewhat later than the Spanish and Portuguese, but quickly made their mark through distinctive approaches to exploration and colonization. The Dutch, renowned for their maritime prowess and commercial acumen, established the Dutch East India Company, VOC, in 1602, followed by the Dutch West India Company, WIC, in 1621. These powerful trading companies were granted monopolies over Dutch trade in Asia and the Americas, respectively. The VOC initially focused on Asia, but the WIC directed its efforts towards the New World, where it sought to challenge Spanish and Portuguese dominance. The Dutch approach to colonization was heavily influenced by their mercantile interests, emphasizing trade, commerce, and the exploitation of natural resources. In North America, the Dutch established New Netherland, with New Amsterdam, present-day New York City, as its capital. This colony served as a vital trading post and gateway for Dutch commerce in the Atlantic world. The strategic location of New Amsterdam, at the mouth of the Hudson River, allowed the Dutch to control key trade routes and establish profitable exchanges with indigenous peoples and other European settlers. The French, on the other hand, pursued a different set of priorities in their colonial ventures. While economic interests were certainly significant, particularly through the lucrative fur trade, the French were also driven by religious and cultural motivations. French explorers, such as Jacques Cartier and Samuel de Champlain, embarked on voyages to North America in search of the elusive Northwest Passage and potential territories for settlement. Champlain's establishment of Quebec in 1608 marked the beginning of a sustained French presence in North America. The French approach to colonization emphasized cooperation and alliance building with indigenous populations. French fur traders, known as coureurs de bois, ventured deep into the interior of the continent, forging extensive networks with Native American tribes. These relationships were mutually beneficial, as the French obtained valuable furs in exchange for European goods, while indigenous communities gained access to new technologies and trade opportunities. French missionaries, particularly Jesuits, also played a crucial role in the colonial enterprise, seeking to convert indigenous peoples to Catholicism and often living among them to better understand and influence their cultures. Comparative context. To fully appreciate the Dutch and French roles in the colonization of the Americas, it is instructive to compare their approaches with those of other European powers, particularly the English. The English, driven by a combination of economic, religious, and political motives, established colonies along the eastern seaboard of North America. Unlike the Dutch and French, the English focused on creating permanent settlements and self-governing communities, as seen in the New England colonies and the Chesapeake Bay region. Interactions with indigenous populations also varied significantly. The English often pursued policies of land acquisition through treaties or purchase, leading to conflicts and displacement of Native American communities. In contrast, the Dutch and French generally maintained more cooperative relationships with indigenous peoples, although these interactions were not without tensions and conflicts. Conclusion. In summary, the background and context of Dutch and French colonization in the Americas are deeply intertwined with the broader historical currents of the Age of Discovery. The economic, religious, and technological motivations that drove European exploration and colonization shaped the distinctive approaches of the Dutch and French in the New World. Understanding these motivations and the comparative context of colonization efforts provides a foundational framework for exploring the specific activities and legacies of Dutch and French colonization in the subsequent parts of our lecture. The Dutch East India Company, VOC. The Dutch East India Company, known by its Dutch initials VOC, Verenigd Oostindische Company, stands as a monumental example of early modern capitalism and corporate enterprise. Established in 1602, the VOC was one of the world's first multinational corporations, and it played a crucial role in the Dutch colonization of the Americas. The company's formation, objectives, and activities not only reflect the broader economic ambitions of the Dutch, but also illustrate the strategic and commercial underpinnings of their colonial endeavors. Formation and objectives of the VOC. The VOC was established by the States General of the Netherlands, a federative government body, as a response to fierce competition with other European powers, particularly the Portuguese and the Spanish. The Dutch Republic, having recently achieved independence from Spanish rule, sought to secure its position in global trade. The VOC was granted a 21-year monopoly to carry out colonial activities in Asia, specifically in the East Indies, modern-day Indonesia, where spices and other valuable commodities were abundant. The company was unique for its time, as it was structured as a joint stock company, allowing it to raise capital by selling shares to investors. This innovative financial model enabled the VOC to amass significant resources, which were then used to fund large-scale expeditions, build a powerful fleet, and establish fortified trading posts and settlements. The VOC's charter granted it quasi-governmental powers, including the authority to negotiate treaties, wage war, and establish colonies, effectively making it a state within a state. The VOC's role in global trade. The VOC's primary mission was to dominate the spice trade, which was immensely lucrative during the 17th century. Spices such as cloves, nutmeg, and pepper were in high demand in Europe, and controlling their trade promised enormous profits. The VOC's operations extended far beyond mere trading. It engaged in complex commercial activities, including production, transportation, and marketing of goods. The company established a vast network of trade routes that connected Europe with Asia, Africa, and the Americas, facilitating the exchange of a wide array of products. In addition to spices, the VOC traded in textiles, porcelain, tea, and other commodities, diversifying its portfolio and increasing its economic influence. The company's trading empire was built on a foundation of strong maritime capabilities, advanced shipbuilding technology, and a well-organized administrative structure. The VOC's ships, known for their durability and efficiency, became a common sight across the world's oceans, symbolizing Dutch commercial prowess. The VOC's expansion into the Americas. While the VOC's primary focus was on Asia, its sister company, the Dutch West India Company, WIC, was established in 1621 to oversee Dutch interests in the Atlantic world, including the Americas. However, the VOC's influence and activities in the Americas cannot be entirely separated from its Asian ventures, as the global trade networks it helped establish were interconnected and mutually reinforcing. The Dutch presence in the Americas was part of a broader strategy to challenge Spanish and Portuguese dominance and secure profitable trade routes. The establishment of New Netherland, with New Amsterdam as its capital, was a key element of this strategy. The Dutch aimed to create a hub for commerce in North America, leveraging their maritime expertise and commercial networks to facilitate trade between Europe and the New World. Establishment of New Amsterdam. In 1626, Peter Minuit, director of the Dutch West India Company, famously purchased the island of Manhattan from the indigenous Lenape people. This transaction, though historically contentious and often romanticized, marked the formal establishment of New Amsterdam. Situated at the mouth of the Hudson River, New Amsterdam's strategic location made it an ideal center for trade and commerce. The settlement quickly grew, attracting a diverse population of traders, artisans, and laborers from various parts of Europe and beyond. New Amsterdam served as a vital trading post where goods from Europe, the Caribbean, and North America were exchanged. The city's harbor became a bustling hub of activity, with ships arriving and departing regularly, laden with a variety of goods, including fur, timber, tobacco, and sugar. The fur trade, in particular, was a cornerstone of New Amsterdam's economy. Dutch traders established extensive networks with indigenous peoples, exchanging European-manufactured goods for valuable pelts. Governance and society in New Amsterdam. The governance of New Amsterdam was initially under the direct control of the Dutch West India Company, which appointed officials to oversee the colony's administration. The colony's leadership focused on ensuring profitability and maintaining order, often prioritizing economic interests over strict governance. This pragmatic approach allowed New Amsterdam to flourish as a cosmopolitan and relatively tolerant society. The social fabric of New Amsterdam was notably diverse. The colony attracted settlers from various European countries, including Germany, England, and Scandinavia, as well as from other Dutch colonies. Additionally, the presence of enslaved Africans, brought to work on plantations and in households, added to the colony's diversity. This melting pot of cultures and ethnicities contributed to the dynamic and vibrant character of New Amsterdam. Economic activities and trade networks. The economic activities in New Amsterdam were driven by the colony's strategic position and the entrepreneurial spirit of its inhabitants. The fur trade, as mentioned, was a primary economic driver, but other industries, such as agriculture, shipbuilding, and manufacturing, also played significant roles. The colony's merchants engaged in triangular trade, exchanging goods between Europe, Africa, and the Americas, further integrating New Amsterdam into the global economy. The Dutch established a robust network of trading posts and settlements along the Hudson River and beyond, extending their influence into the interior of North America. These outposts facilitated trade with indigenous populations and served as bases for further exploration and expansion. The Dutch approach to trade was characterized by negotiation and partnership, often forming alliances with indigenous groups to secure access to valuable resources. Conclusion: the Dutch East India Company, through its activities and the establishment of New Amsterdam, exemplified the Dutch pursuit of economic prosperity and strategic dominance in the Americas. The VOC's innovative financial model, maritime capabilities, and commercial networks laid the foundation for Dutch colonial ventures, including the significant foothold in North America. New Amsterdam, as a center of trade and cultural exchange, reflects the broader Dutch approach to colonization, which prioritized commerce and pragmatism. Understanding the VOC's role and the establishment of New Amsterdam provides crucial insights into the complexities and dynamics of Dutch colonization in the New World. Establishment of New Amsterdam. The establishment of New Amsterdam in 1626 marked a significant milestone in Dutch colonization efforts in North America. This settlement, strategically located on the island of Manhattan, served as a vital trading post and the capital of the Dutch colony of New Netherland. The development of New Amsterdam not only exemplified the Dutch pursuit of economic prosperity, but also highlighted the distinctive features of Dutch colonial policies and interactions with indigenous populations. Strategic importance of New Amsterdam. The choice of Manhattan as the site for New Amsterdam was no accident. The island's location at the mouth of the Hudson River provided an ideal natural harbor, offering easy access to both the Atlantic Ocean and the interior of North America. This strategic position allowed the Dutch to control key trade routes, facilitating the transport of goods between Europe and the New World. The Hudson River itself served as a critical artery for the fur trade, one of the main economic drivers of the colony. The establishment of New Amsterdam enabled the Dutch to create a hub for commerce that could rival other European colonial centers in the Americas. The city's harbor became a bustling port where ships from Europe, the Caribbean, and other parts of North America docked to exchange a variety of goods, including fur, timber, tobacco, and sugar. This trade activity was central to the economic viability and growth of New Amsterdam. Key figures in the establishment and governance of New Amsterdam. Several key figures played crucial roles in the establishment and early governance of New Amsterdam. One of the most notable was Peter Minuit, the director of the Dutch West India Company, who is famously known for purchasing the island of Manhattan from the indigenous Lenape people in 1626. Although the historical details and fairness of this transaction are debated, it symbolized the formal beginning of Dutch settlement on the island. Under the leadership of the Dutch West India Company, New Amsterdam was governed with a focus on economic interests and profitability. The company appointed officials to oversee the colony's administration, including a director general who acted as the chief executive. Early governors, such as Peter Minuit and later Peter Stuyvesant, were responsible for maintaining order, promoting trade, and managing relations with both indigenous peoples and rival European powers. Peter Stuyvesant, in particular, was a significant figure in New Amsterdam's history. Serving as the last Dutch Director General of New Netherland from 1647 until the English takeover in 1664, Stuyvesant implemented several reforms to improve the colony's defenses, infrastructure, and governance. Despite his often authoritarian style, Stuyvesant's efforts contributed to the stability and growth of New Amsterdam during a period of increasing tension and competition in the region. Economic activities and trade networks. The economy of New Amsterdam was diverse and dynamic, driven by its strategic location and the entrepreneurial spirit of its inhabitants. The fur trade was a primary economic activity, with Dutch traders establishing extensive networks with indigenous groups to procure valuable pelts in exchange for European goods. This trade not only brought wealth to the colony but also fostered cultural exchanges and alliances with various indigenous communities. In addition to the fur trade, New Amsterdam's economy included agriculture, shipbuilding, and manufacturing. The fertile lands surrounding the settlement supported farming, providing food for the local population and surplus for trade. Shipbuilding emerged as a significant industry, given the colony's reliance on maritime commerce. The construction and maintenance of ships were essential to sustaining the trade networks that connected New Amsterdam to other parts of the Dutch Empire and beyond. The colony's merchants engaged in triangular trade, exchanging goods between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. This included the transport of enslaved Africans, who were brought to New Amsterdam to work in various capacities, contributing to the colony's labor force and economic activities. The involvement in the transatlantic slave trade, while a dark aspect of the colony's history, was integral to its economic operations and connections to the broader Atlantic world. Social and cultural life in New Amsterdam. New Amsterdam was notable for its cultural diversity and relatively tolerant society. The settlement attracted a wide range of settlers from various European countries, including the Netherlands, Germany, England, and Scandinavia. This melting pot of cultures and ethnicities contributed to the colony's dynamic social fabric. The Dutch policy of religious tolerance allowed people of different faiths, including Jews, Lutherans, and Quakers, to live and practice their beliefs relatively freely. The social structure of New Amsterdam was influenced by Dutch customs and legal traditions, with a focus on trade and commerce. The presence of enslaved Africans added another layer to the colony's diversity, as they brought their own cultural practices and traditions, influencing the broader community. This mix of cultures and backgrounds created a unique environment where different traditions and customs coexisted, albeit within the constraints of the colonial system. Challenges and conflicts. Despite its economic success and cultural vibrancy, New Amsterdam faced several challenges and conflicts. Relations with indigenous peoples were complex and sometimes contentious. While trade alliances were beneficial, disputes over land and resources occasionally led to violent conflicts. The colony also had to contend with rival European powers, particularly the English, who sought to expand their own territories in North America. Internal governance issues and tensions among settlers also posed challenges. The Dutch West India Company's focus on profits sometimes led to neglect of the colony's social and infrastructural needs, causing dissatisfaction among the settlers. Efforts by governors like Peter Stuyvesant to impose stricter control and order were met with resistance, reflecting the colony's diverse and often independent-minded population. Conclusion. The establishment of New Amsterdam was a crucial chapter in the Dutch colonization of the Americas. Its strategic location, economic activities, and cultural diversity exemplified the Dutch approach to colonization, which prioritized trade and commerce. Key figures like Peter Minuit and Peter Stuyvesant played significant roles in shaping the colony's development and governance. Despite the challenges and conflicts, New Amsterdam laid the foundations for what would become one of the most important cities in the world, New York City. Understanding the establishment and early history of New Amsterdam provides valuable insights into the broader dynamics of Dutch colonization and its lasting impact on American history. Economic foundations and the fur trade. The economic foundations of Dutch colonization in the Americas were deeply rooted in the fur trade, which emerged as a primary driver of economic activity in New Netherland, particularly in New Amsterdam. The fur trade not only shaped the colony's economy but also influenced its social structure, interactions with indigenous populations, and overall development. Understanding the intricacies of this trade and its impacts provides critical insights into the Dutch colonial enterprise in North America. The fur trade, an economic cornerstone. The fur trade was central to the Dutch economy in New Netherland, driven by the high demand for fur pelts in Europe. European markets prized beaver fur for its use in making felt hats, which were fashionable and highly sought after. The abundance of fur-bearing animals in North America presented a lucrative opportunity for the Dutch to capitalize on this demand. Dutch traders, known as merchants or factors, established extensive networks to acquire furs. These networks extended deep into the interior of North America, where they traded with various indigenous groups. Indigenous communities played a crucial role in the fur trade, as they possessed the knowledge and skills required to trap and process the furs. In exchange for pelts, the Dutch provided European goods, including metal tools, firearms, textiles, and alcohol, which were highly valued by indigenous peoples. Key trading posts and routes. To facilitate the fur trade, the Dutch established key trading posts and routes along major waterways. The Hudson River, in particular, was a vital artery for trade. Fort Orange, modern-day Albany, New York, was one of the most important trading posts, strategically located at a point where traders could easily access both the interior regions and the Atlantic coast. This fort served as a central hub where furs were collected, stored, and prepared for shipment to Europe. The Dutch also established trading relationships with other European powers, including the French and the English, sometimes cooperating and other times competing for control over lucrative trade routes and territories. These interactions contributed to the complex web of alliances and rivalries that characterized the colonial period. Interactions with indigenous populations. The fur trade necessitated close and ongoing interactions between the Dutch and indigenous populations. These relationships were often based on mutual benefit, with indigenous groups gaining access to valuable European goods and the Dutch securing a steady supply of furs. However, these interactions were not without their challenges and complexities. The Dutch approach to trade emphasized negotiation and alliance building. They often formed partnerships with specific tribes, such as the Iroquois Confederacy, which became key trading partners and allies. These alliances were sometimes formalized through treaties and agreements, which outline the terms of trade and mutual obligations. The Dutch provided military support and goods, while the indigenous partners ensured a steady supply of furs and sometimes assisted in conflicts with rival tribes or European settlers. However, the fur trade also had significant social and cultural impacts on indigenous communities. The introduction of European goods and technologies altered traditional ways of life, leading to changes in social structures, economic practices, and even political dynamics. The fur trade created new dependencies on European goods, which could lead to tensions and conflicts within and between indigenous groups. Economic impact on New Amsterdam. The prosperity brought by the fur trade had a profound impact on the development of New Amsterdam. The wealth generated from the trade allowed for the growth of other economic activities, such as agriculture, shipbuilding, and manufacturing. As a bustling port city, New Amsterdam attracted a diverse population of traders, artisans, and laborers, contributing to its cosmopolitan character. The economic success of the fur trade also enabled investments in infrastructure and defense. The construction of fortifications, warehouses, and docks facilitated further trade and protected the colony from potential threats. The Dutch West India Company, which oversaw the colony's administration, reinvested profits from the fur trade into the colony's development, although its primary focus remained on maintaining profitability. Social and cultural dynamics. The economic activities centered around the fur trade also shaped the social and cultural dynamics of New Amsterdam. The colony's population included not only Dutch settlers, but also immigrants from various European countries, enslaved Africans, and indigenous peoples. This diversity created a unique social fabric characterized by a blend of cultures, languages, and traditions. The presence of enslaved Africans in New Amsterdam was a direct result of the colony's involvement in the transatlantic slave trade. Enslaved individuals were brought to work on plantations, in households, and in various trades, contributing to the colony's economy. Their presence added to the cultural diversity of the colony, but also highlighted the complexities and contradictions of colonial society. Challenges and conflicts. Despite the economic benefits of the fur trade, New Amsterdam faced several challenges and conflicts. The competition for control over fur resources sometimes led to violent clashes with rival European powers, particularly the English and the French. The Dutch had to navigate a complex landscape of alliances and rivalries, both with other colonial powers and with indigenous groups. Internal conflicts also arose within the colony. Disputes over trade practices, governance, and social issues were common. The Dutch West India Company's focus on profitability sometimes led to neglect of settlers' needs and grievances, causing tensions between the company's administrators and the colony's inhabitants. Efforts to impose stricter controls and regulations, such as those implemented by Peter Stuyvesant, were met with resistance and contributed to social unrest. Legacy of the fur trade. The legacy of the fur trade in New Amsterdam and New Netherland is multifaceted. Economically, it laid the foundation for the colony's prosperity and growth, integrating it into global trade networks and contributing to its strategic importance. Socially and culturally, the fur trade facilitated interactions and exchanges between diverse groups, shaping the colony's unique character. However, the fur trade also had lasting impacts on indigenous populations, altering their traditional ways of life and creating new dependencies and conflicts. The environmental consequences of intensive trapping and hunting were significant, affecting wildlife populations and ecosystems. Conclusion. The economic foundations of New Amsterdam were deeply intertwined with the fur trade, which served as a cornerstone of the colony's prosperity and development. The trade networks established by the Dutch, their interactions with indigenous populations, and the resulting social and cultural dynamics all contributed to the unique character of New Amsterdam. Understanding the economic and social impacts of the fur trade provides a comprehensive view of the Dutch colonial enterprise in North America and its lasting legacy. The governance and societal structure of New Amsterdam reflected the unique characteristics of Dutch colonization, characterized by pragmatic administration, economic focus, and cultural diversity. The colony's governance was primarily driven by the Dutch West India Company, while the social fabric was shaped by a mix of settlers, indigenous peoples, and enslaved Africans. This section explores the governance framework, key figures, societal dynamics, and the challenges faced by the colony. Governance framework and the role of the Dutch West India Company. New Amsterdam's governance was largely dictated by the Dutch West India Company, WIC, which held extensive control over the colony's administrative, economic, and military affairs. The WIC was granted a charter by the States General of the Netherlands in 1621, which provided it with broad powers to establish colonies, negotiate treaties, and engage in trade. The company's primary objective was to maximize profits, which significantly influenced the colony's governance style and policies. The WIC appointed a Director General to oversee the colony's administration. This individual acted as the chief executive, responsible for implementing the company's policies, maintaining order, and ensuring the profitability of the colony. The Director General was supported by a council of advisors, which included other company officials and prominent settlers. This council played a crucial role in decision-making and governance, although ultimate authority rested with the WIC in Amsterdam. Key figures in governance. Several key figures played pivotal roles in the governance of New Amsterdam, shaping its development and policies. Among the most notable were Peter Minuit and Peter Stuyvesant. Peter Minuit, serving as the first Director General of New Netherland, Minuit is best known for his role in purchasing Manhattan from the Lenape in 1626. This transaction, although symbolic and controversial, marked the formal establishment of New Amsterdam. Minuit's tenure focused on strengthening the colony's economic foundations and establishing diplomatic relations with indigenous peoples. Peter Stuyvesant, appointed as Director General in 1647, Stuyvesant is perhaps the most famous governor of New Amsterdam. His administration was marked by efforts to impose stricter control, improve defenses, and enhance infrastructure. Stuyvesant's authoritarian style often led to conflicts with settlers, but his reforms contributed to the colony's stability and growth during a critical period. Legal and administrative structure. The legal and administrative structure of New Amsterdam was influenced by Dutch legal traditions and the needs of a colonial trading post. The colony's laws were based on the Dutch legal system, adapted to suit the local context. This included regulations on trade, property rights, and social behavior. The Director General and his council acted as the highest judicial authority, handling disputes and enforcing laws. Local governance was also characterized by a degree of pragmatism and flexibility. Settlers were often involved in decision-making processes, particularly in matters related to trade and community affairs. This participatory approach helped address local issues and fostered a sense of community among the diverse population. Social structure and cultural diversity. The social structure of New Amsterdam was remarkably diverse, reflecting the colony's role as a major trading hub. The population included Dutch settlers, immigrants from various European countries, indigenous peoples, and enslaved Africans. This diversity created a cosmopolitan environment where different cultures, languages, and traditions coexisted. Dutch settlers formed the core of the colony's population, bringing their customs, traditions, and legal practices. They were primarily involved in trade, agriculture, and artisanal crafts, contributing to the colony's economic activities. European immigrants. New Amsterdam attracted immigrants from various parts of Europe, including Germany, England, Scandinavia, and the Baltic region. These immigrants brought their own cultural influences, adding to the colony's diversity. Many were drawn by the economic opportunities and the relatively tolerant atmosphere. Indigenous peoples. Indigenous communities played a crucial role in the colony's economy, particularly through the fur trade. The Dutch established alliances and trade relationships with various tribes, including the Iroquois Confederacy. These interactions were complex, involving both cooperation and conflict. Enslaved Africans. The presence of enslaved Africans was a significant aspect of New Amsterdam's social structure. They were brought to the colony to work on plantations, in households, and in various trades. Despite their marginalization, enslaved Africans contributed to the colony's economy and cultural diversity. Religious tolerance and pluralism. One of the distinguishing features of New Amsterdam was its relatively high degree of religious tolerance. The Dutch Republic itself was known for its policies of religious freedom, which extended to its colonies. As a result, New Amsterdam became a refuge for people of various faiths, including Jews, Lutherans, Quakers, and Catholics. This religious pluralism contributed to the colony's dynamic social fabric. While there were occasional tensions and conflicts, the general atmosphere of tolerance allowed different religious communities to coexist and practice their faiths. This policy of tolerance not only attracted settlers, but also facilitated trade and economic growth, as merchants and traders from diverse backgrounds were welcomed. Economic and social challenges. Despite its economic success and cultural vibrancy, New Amsterdam faced several challenges. Governance issues, internal conflicts, and external threats posed significant obstacles to the colony's stability and growth. Governance issues. The Dutch West India Company's focus on profitability sometimes led to neglect of the colony's social and infrastructural needs. This caused dissatisfaction among settlers, who demanded more attention to their concerns and greater autonomy in local governance. Internal conflicts. The diverse population of New Amsterdam occasionally experienced conflicts and tensions. Disputes over land, trade practices, and social issues were common. The authoritarian style of some governors, particularly Peter Stuyvesant, also contributed to social unrest and resistance. External threats. The colony faced constant threats from rival European powers, particularly the English. The competition for control over trade routes and territories led to military conflicts and diplomatic tensions. The eventual English takeover of New Netherland in 1664 marked the end of Dutch control and the beginning of a new chapter in the colony's history. Conclusion. The governance and society of New Amsterdam were shaped by the Dutch West India Company's economic priorities, the leadership of key figures like Peter Minuit and Peter Stuyvesant, and the colony's diverse population. The pragmatic and flexible governance style, combined with policies of religious tolerance and cultural pluralism, contributed to the colony's dynamic character. However, internal conflicts, governance challenges, and external threats posed significant obstacles to its stability and growth. Understanding these aspects of governance and society provides a comprehensive view of New Amsterdam's development and its lasting impact on American history. French colonization in North America, like the Dutch, was driven by the pursuit of economic opportunities, the fur trade at the forefront of their endeavors. The French approach was marked by involvement in the fur trade and interactions with indigenous peoples, fostering economic growth and cultural exchange. The primary motivation for French exploration and colonization in North America was the fur trade. Demand for beaver pelts and other furs was high, driven by fashion trends and the utility of fur in warm clothing. The French crown and private investors recognized the potential for profits in North America's fur resources. French exploration was also motivated by geopolitical considerations. Establishing a presence in North America was seen as a way to expand French influence and compete with other European powers, mainly Spain and England. French missionaries sought to convert indigenous peoples to Christianity. The fur trade was the backbone of the French colonial economy in North America. It was characterized by a network of trading posts, alliances with indigenous groups, and the work of independent traders known as coureurs de bois. The French established numerous trading posts across their territories, including prominent ones like Quebec, Montreal, and Trois-Rivières. These posts served as hubs where furs were collected, stored, and prepared for shipment to Europe. The network extended into the interior. The French approach to the fur trade relied on alliances with indigenous groups. Unlike the English, who often sought to acquire land, the French focused on building partnerships. These alliances were mutually beneficial. Indigenous groups received European goods, such as metal tools, weapons, and textiles, in exchange for furs. The French also provided military support to their allies in conflicts with rival tribes. Coureurs de bois. Independent French traders, known as coureurs de bois, runners of the woods, played a crucial role in the fur trade. These traders ventured deep into the wilderness, living among indigenous communities and establishing extensive trade networks. Their activities were pivotal in maintaining the flow of furs to French trading posts and fostering cultural exchanges between Europeans and indigenous peoples. Interactions with indigenous peoples. The fur trade necessitated close and sustained interactions between French settlers and indigenous populations. These interactions were characterized by both cooperation and conflict, shaped by the dynamics of trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. Cooperation and alliances. French settlers formed alliances with various indigenous groups, including the Huron-Wendat, Algonquin, and Montagnais. These alliances were cemented through trade agreements, intermarriage, and mutual support in conflicts. The French often adopted a relatively respectful approach to indigenous cultures, learning their languages and customs to facilitate trade and diplomacy. Cultural exchange and adaptation. the fur trade fostered significant cultural exchange between the French and indigenous peoples. French traders and missionaries learned indigenous languages, while indigenous groups adopted European goods and technologies. This exchange led to the creation of a unique cultural milieu in which elements of French and indigenous traditions coexisted and blended. Conflict and tensions. Despite generally cooperative relations, conflicts did arise. Competition for control over fur resources sometimes led to disputes and violence. Additionally, the introduction of European goods and diseases had profound impacts on indigenous societies, leading to social upheaval and population declines. Economic impact on French colonies. The fur trade was the economic lifeblood of French colonies in North America, underpinning their prosperity and growth. The wealth generated from the trade financed further exploration, settlement, and the establishment of infrastructure, such as forts and trading posts. Key colonial centers like Quebec and Montreal thrived as major hubs of commerce and governance. The fur trade also stimulated the development of other economic activities. Agriculture, for instance, supported the growing population, providing food for settlers and surplus for trade. Shipbuilding and manufacturing of trade goods, such as clothing and metal tools, also became important economic sectors, linked to the needs of the fur trade. Social and cultural dynamics. The fur trade significantly influenced the social and cultural dynamics of French colonies. The presence of a diverse population, including French settlers, indigenous peoples, and Métis, people of mixed French and indigenous ancestry, created a vibrant and multifaceted society. French settlers brought their customs, legal traditions, and Catholic faith to the colonies. They established communities that reflected a blend of French and local influences, with a strong emphasis on trade and agriculture. Indigenous peoples and Métis. Indigenous communities maintained a strong presence in the fur trade, shaping the social landscape of the colonies. The emergence of the Métis population highlighted the deep cultural interconnections between French and indigenous peoples. Métis communities often played a crucial role in bridging cultural divides and facilitating trade. Religious influence. French missionaries, particularly Jesuits, were active in the colonies, seeking to convert indigenous peoples to Christianity. Their efforts led to the establishment of missions and the spread of Catholicism, which became a significant aspect of colonial society. Challenges and conflicts. Despite the economic benefits, the fur trade brought challenges and conflicts. Competition with other European powers, particularly the English and Dutch, often led to military conflicts and diplomatic tensions. The French had to defend their territories and trade routes against encroachment, leading to a series of skirmishes and wars. Internal governance issues also posed challenges. The administration of the colonies had to balance the interests of the fur trade with the needs of settlers and the demands of the French crown. Corruption, inefficiency, and disputes over resources were common problems that affected the stability and growth of the colonies. Legacy of the fur trade. The legacy of the fur trade in French North America is profound. Economically, it laid the foundation for the development of key colonial centers and integrated the region into global trade networks. Socially and culturally, it fostered deep connections between French and indigenous peoples, leading to the creation of a unique cultural landscape. However, the fur trade also had lasting impacts on indigenous populations, including social disruption, economic dependency, and significant demographic changes due to disease and conflict. The environmental consequences of intensive trapping and hunting were substantial, affecting wildlife populations and ecosystems. Conclusion. The fur trade was the cornerstone of French exploration and colonization in North America, driving economic activity and shaping the social and cultural dynamics of the colonies. The French approach, characterized by alliances with indigenous peoples, the work of coureurs de bois, and the establishment of extensive trade networks facilitated both economic prosperity and cultural exchange. Understanding the mechanisms and impacts of the fur trade provides a comprehensive view of French colonial endeavors and their lasting legacy in North American history. French missionary efforts and religious influence. French colonization in North America was driven not only by economic ambitions but also by religious motivations. French missionaries, particularly members of the Jesuit order, played a significant role in the colonies, seeking to convert indigenous populations to Christianity and establish a strong Catholic presence. This section explores the objectives, methods, and impacts of French missionary efforts in the New World. Objectives of French missionary efforts. The primary objective of French missionaries was to convert indigenous peoples to Catholicism. This religious mission was intertwined with the broader goals of French colonization, as spreading Christianity was seen as a civilizing force that would bring indigenous populations into the fold of European culture and governance. French missionaries aimed to establish churches, schools, and communities that reflected Catholic values and teachings. Additionally, French missionaries sought to strengthen French influence in North America by forging alliances with indigenous groups. Converting indigenous leaders and communities to Christianity was viewed as a way to secure their loyalty and cooperation, thus bolstering French territorial claims and trade networks. Methods and strategies. French missionaries employed a variety of methods and strategies to achieve their goals. Key among these were establishment of missions. French missionaries established missions, which served as centers for religious instruction, education, and cultural exchange. These missions were often strategically located near indigenous communities to facilitate daily interaction and influence. Learning indigenous languages and cultures. To effectively communicate their message, French missionaries learned indigenous languages and immersed themselves in local cultures. This approach enabled them to translate religious texts, preach in the native languages, and better understand the social and spiritual context of the communities they aimed to convert. Adapting religious practices. French missionaries adapted Catholic rituals and practices to make them more accessible and appealing to indigenous populations. This included incorporating indigenous symbols and traditions into Christian ceremonies, which helped bridge cultural gaps and facilitate acceptance. Education and social services. Missionaries provided education and social services, such as healthcare and food assistance, to indigenous communities. These efforts not only met immediate needs but also built goodwill and trust, making indigenous people more receptive to the missionaries' religious teachings. Impact on indigenous communities. The impact of French missionary efforts on indigenous communities was multifaceted, with both positive and negative consequences. Cultural exchange and adaptation. The interactions between French missionaries and indigenous peoples led to significant cultural exchange. Indigenous communities adopted elements of Catholicism, while missionaries incorporated aspects of indigenous spirituality and customs into their teachings. This exchange created a unique blend of religious and cultural practices. Social and educational changes. Missionary efforts contributed to the education and social development of indigenous communities. Schools established by missionaries taught reading, writing, and European agricultural techniques, which sometimes improved living standards and facilitated adaptation to changing economic conditions. Resistance and conflict. Not all indigenous groups welcomed the missionaries. Some resisted conversion efforts, viewing them as a threat to their traditional beliefs and ways of life. This resistance sometimes led to conflicts and strained relations between French settlers and indigenous communities. Long-term legacy. The long-term legacy of French missionary efforts in North America is complex. On one hand, they contributed to the spread of Christianity and the establishment of Catholic institutions that continue to play a role in the region's cultural and religious landscape. Many indigenous communities today still practice a form of Catholicism that reflects the historical influence of French missionaries. On the other hand, missionary efforts also had detrimental effects. The imposition of foreign religious beliefs often disrupted traditional spiritual practices and social structures. The missionaries' role in promoting European cultural norms and values sometimes undermined indigenous identities and contributed to the broader process of colonization and assimilation. Conclusion: French missionary efforts were a key component of the broader French colonial enterprise in North America. Driven by religious zeal and a desire to expand French influence, missionaries employed a range of strategies to convert indigenous populations to Catholicism. Their efforts led to significant cultural exchange, social changes, and, in some cases, resistance and conflict. The legacy of these efforts is evident in the enduring presence of Catholicism among many indigenous communities and the complex history of cultural interaction and adaptation in the region. Understanding the role of French missionaries provides a deeper insight into the multifaceted nature of French colonization and its lasting impacts on North American history. Comparing Dutch and French colonization approaches. The Dutch and French approaches to colonization in North America were marked by distinct strategies and goals, reflecting their respective economic interests, cultural priorities, and methods of interaction with indigenous populations. This section compares and contrasts these approaches to provide a clearer understanding of their impacts and legacies. Economic objectives. The Dutch colonization strategy focused heavily on trade and commerce. The Dutch East India Company and the Dutch West India Company drove economic activities, with a strong emphasis on establishing profitable trading posts and controlling key trade routes. The Dutch prioritized economic gain, using New Amsterdam, modern-day New York City, as a strategic hub for trade, particularly in furs and other valuable commodities. The Dutch approach was primarily profit-driven, with trade and expansion being central to their colonial enterprise. In contrast, French colonization was also economically motivated, but with a greater emphasis on the fur trade and the development of extensive trade networks. The French focused on establishing alliances with indigenous peoples to facilitate the fur trade, which was integral to their colonial economy. French explorers and traders, such as Samuel de Champlain, played crucial roles in creating and maintaining these trade relationships. The French approach combined economic goals with diplomatic and cultural engagement, aiming to integrate with and support indigenous trade networks. Interactions with indigenous peoples. The Dutch approach to indigenous relations was often pragmatic and transactional. The Dutch generally sought to establish trade agreements and maintain peaceful relations, though their expansion occasionally led to conflicts. The Dutch were known for negotiating treaties and maintaining a relatively neutral stance in indigenous conflicts, which helped them secure trade partnerships but did not always prevent tensions. The French, on the other hand, adopted a more integrated approach. They formed strategic alliances with various indigenous groups, such as the Huron-Wendat and Algonquin, and often intermarried with indigenous peoples, leading to the creation of the Métis community. French missionaries and traders engaged deeply with indigenous cultures, learning languages and adapting practices to build trust and cooperation. This approach fostered more enduring and complex relationships, though it also led to cultural and social transformations within indigenous communities. Governance and settlement. Dutch governance in New Netherland was characterized by a focus on trade and economic efficiency. The Dutch West India Company controlled the colony with an emphasis on profitability, which sometimes led to conflicts with settlers over governance and resource allocation. Dutch settlements, including New Amsterdam, were primarily commercial outposts rather than agricultural communities. French governance in New France, including Quebec and Montreal, involved more direct involvement in settlement and administration. The French crown supported efforts to establish permanent communities, integrating colonial administration with missionary work and trade. French colonies were often more community-focused, with a stronger emphasis on developing agricultural and social infrastructure. Legacy. The Dutch legacy in North America is evident in the lasting impact of New Amsterdam's transformation into New York City, reflecting a heritage of commercial enterprise and urban development. Dutch contributions to trade and infrastructure left a lasting mark on the region's economic landscape. The French legacy includes a significant influence on cultural and social aspects of North America, particularly through the persistence of French language and traditions in Canada. The Métis community and ongoing relationships with Indigenous peoples reflect the depth of French integration and cultural exchange. Conclusion. The Dutch and French approaches to colonization were shaped by their distinct economic goals, methods of interaction with indigenous populations, and governance styles. While the Dutch focused on trade and economic efficiency, the French emphasized integration and alliances. Understanding these differences highlights the diverse strategies employed by European powers in shaping the history of North America. Impact on indigenous peoples. The impact of Dutch and French colonization on indigenous peoples was profound and multifaceted, shaping the social, economic, and cultural landscapes of North America. Both European powers interacted with indigenous communities in ways that had lasting effects, though their approaches and outcomes varied. Dutch impact. The Dutch approach to indigenous peoples was primarily economic and transactional. Dutch settlers and traders sought to establish trade relationships with indigenous groups, such as the Lenape and Iroquois, focusing on the fur trade. While this interaction often involved negotiation and mutual benefit, it also had significant consequences for indigenous communities. Economic disruption. The fur trade transformed indigenous economies by introducing new goods and altering traditional practices. Indigenous groups became increasingly dependent on European trade items, such as metal tools and firearms, which disrupted traditional ways of life and economic systems. Land and conflict. The expansion of Dutch settlements and trade posts led to increased pressure on indigenous lands. Although the Dutch attempted to negotiate land purchases and treaties, conflicts over territory and resources sometimes arose. The encroachment of Dutch settlers contributed to tensions and skirmishes with indigenous groups, affecting their traditional territories and ways of life. Cultural exchange. Dutch interactions with indigenous peoples also led to cultural exchanges. Indigenous groups adopted certain European goods and technologies, while Dutch settlers learned about indigenous practices and customs. However, the dominant focus on economic transactions often limited the depth of cultural integration. French impact. French colonization had a more integrative approach towards indigenous peoples, with significant emphasis on alliances and cultural exchange. Alliance and integration. The French formed strategic alliances with various indigenous groups, such as the Huron-Wendat and Algonquin. These alliances were based on mutual benefit, with the French providing European goods and military support in exchange for furs and trade partnerships. The integration of French and indigenous cultures, including intermarriage and shared traditions, fostered strong relationships. Cultural adaptation. French missionaries and traders engaged deeply with indigenous cultures, learning languages and adapting their practices to build trust and cooperation. This approach facilitated cultural exchange and contributed to the creation of the Métis community, which blended French and indigenous traditions. Social and economic changes. The French fur trade influenced indigenous social structures and economies. The reliance on fur trade networks altered traditional practices and created new social dynamics. While the French provided valuable goods and support, the introduction of European diseases and changes to traditional ways of life had detrimental effects on indigenous populations. Legacy. The legacies of Dutch and French colonization on indigenous peoples are evident in the lasting cultural, social, and economic impacts. The Dutch legacy includes the disruptions caused by trade and settlement pressures, while the French legacy reflects a complex history of alliances and cultural exchange. Both colonization efforts left enduring marks on indigenous communities, shaping their histories and interactions with European powers. Conclusion: the impact of Dutch and French colonization on indigenous peoples was significant, with both positive and negative consequences. While Dutch interactions were largely driven by economic goals, the French approach involved deeper cultural integration and alliances. Understanding these impacts provides insight into the complex relationships between European colonizers and indigenous communities and their enduring legacies in North American history. The Dutch and French colonization efforts in North America, while driven by distinct motivations and methods, both left profound and lasting impacts on the continent. The Dutch focused on establishing a commercial empire through the Dutch East India Company and the Dutch West India Company, creating a significant trading hub in New Amsterdam, now New York City. Their approach was predominantly economic, with a pragmatic engagement with indigenous peoples that prioritized trade and commerce. Despite their relatively peaceful relations, Dutch expansion did bring challenges, including land pressures and cultural disruption. In contrast, the French colonization strategy was deeply intertwined with religious and economic goals. French efforts were characterized by an emphasis on the fur trade, the formation of alliances with indigenous groups, and a strong missionary presence. French missionaries, particularly Jesuits, played a crucial role in attempting to convert indigenous peoples to Christianity and integrating with local cultures. This approach fostered deep cultural exchanges, but also led to significant social and economic changes for indigenous communities. Comparing these approaches reveals key differences. The Dutch were more focused on trade and commercial expansion, while the French engaged in cultural and religious integration alongside economic pursuits. Both colonization efforts had complex impacts on indigenous societies, from economic dependency and cultural adaptation to conflicts and transformations in traditional ways of life. Understanding the legacies of Dutch and French colonization helps us appreciate the diverse motivations and outcomes of European expansion in North America. These historical interactions shaped the social, economic, and cultural landscapes of the continent and continue to influence its development. Reflecting on these legacies enriches our understanding of the intricate and multifaceted history of the Americas.